Welcome to Cisco SPNGN2 here at CBT Nuggets. My name is Jeremy Chara, and I am so excited to be here with you. I can't tell you how excited I get to record these opening nuggets because for me, I know for you, it's typically the very first one you go into. For me, it's always the last one that I record. So literally seconds ago, I was talking about final thoughts on iOS XR management, upgrading, turbo boot, a lot of that. And I'm like, that was awesome. And now I get to just put the bow on the whole series and put it all together and roll it out to, I know I've seen so much excitement for this SPNGN2 and 1 series that I've created because there's nothing out there for it. Cisco released this amazing certification and then failed to release any materials to prepare for it. Now, maybe by the time you're hearing this, there's something out there, but there's not even a book. There's not even a Cisco Press book or anything out there written for it. So unlike any other series that I've created, just the buzz around this has been so high because everybody's like, oh, finally there's a training where I don't have to fly to Cisco and take a Cisco run class in a classroom environment for a week. Anyway, I digress, right? Can you guess I'm excited? Why we are here? So number one, to understand the service provider certifications. Two, talk about how we train at CBT Nuggets. If you haven't gone through it before, it's amazing. You'll love CBT Nuggets. It's a great format. And then finally, getting the most from this series. Let me say this slide disturbs me as we get into the Cisco certifications. I think it's some of my type A, maybe anal type A. What am I saying? I'm so not a type A personality. But nonetheless, the fact that line right there is missing just makes me immediately go, something's wrong with that slide, but it's not. Welcome to this discussion of Cisco certification. CCNA Service Provider is actually one of the most confusing certifications for folks to get in because it's disjointed, unlike the rest of them. So, first off, we know Cisco certification starts with CCENT. That's just about where most everybody gets into Cisco. Not all the time, but most get in there with their ICND 1 certification. Then they pass ICND 2, and voila, they have their CCNA routing and switching. This is where the vast majority of people go. Now, Cisco created one service provider track that they call Service Provider Ops, which is just kind of a jump off of the CCENT. So it kind of builds from CCENT and goes forward with this Service Provider Operations, and then, much to the confusion of the industry, along with the fact that they didn't release any materials for it, they created this CCNA Service Provider, which has no prerequisites. Essentially, it does not require CCENT to get into, and is completely separate on its own. So, first off, what's up with that? What is the difference? What was Cisco thinking when they created Service Provider Ops and Service Provider as these two separate tracks? Well, think about the name. Service Provider Ops. Just envision it. What do you think of when you think of, yep, that guy's in Ops, right? Operations. Like, for some reason, I think of an episode of like 24 or something where these are the guys in the van, right? The guys in the van, everybody's going in, guns loaded. The guys in the van behind the scenes are operations, their communication, making sure everything's working. They didn't come up with the plan, right? They're just the guys in the van. They usually get blown up by a missile at some point in the show, but these are just the guys. I shouldn't say. Everybody's like, man, I don't want to go into the ops. I'm going to get blown. No, it's just these are the people that are coming in to do the day-to-day operations. So what's the difference? CCNA service providers are the ones who designed it, right? These are the guys who built the service provider network from the ground up, or a lot of times get into the architecture. So this track, the reason it has no prerequisites is because it's assumed that you're starting from scratch, and we want to kind of immerse you into a service provider design and architecture mindset to build it from the ground up rather than walking into the already built environment of the service provider ops. A lot more, day-to-day show commands in the service provider ops world, whereas CCNA service provider, not to say that it's light on configuration by any means, it's just there's a lot more big picture thought that goes into the CCNA service provider of, like, instead of just coming in and saying, well, here's how you manage BGP, it's like, well, here's how you set up BGP from the ground up in the CCNA service provider. Does that make sense? So here's my bullet. Statistically, most people go this way. CCNA service provider allows service providers to hire somebody and immerse them in the service provider mindset from the very beginning. Each certification and exam has an expiration of 3 years, and I just talked about that. I think the CBT Nuggets website said it best. I just went there before I started recording this nugget, and right on the title page, I don't know if it'll be there now, but their kind of banner said "Learning with Passion," and I thought, what a great little snippet that describes how we train at CBT Nuggets. It's exciting, fun learning about technology. To use the tagline, with passion, right? But the funny thing is, I don't even think of it that way. I just think, man, this stuff is so cool and it's so exciting. And I never knew the rest of the world wasn't that way until I started my own company. About 5 years ago, I started a consulting organization that essentially anyway, we do all kinds of stuff. I don't want to blab on about my company, but one of the things that we do is we are a service provider. I got space in a data center, started bringing up private lines to different customers and becoming their ISP, which it was just so timely that I got to do the series. I'm like, man, I finally get to talk about a lot of the stuff that I've been doing, but I started hiring people, right? So I'm like, hiring people with very little knowledge, because I thought, well, maybe I don't have to pay them that much, and I'll explain this stuff to them and they're gonna like get it, and they're gonna totally get it. And so I started hiring people, and they came in, and I'd bring them into a conference room. I'm like, okay, so I want to show you about IP addressing, subnetting, whatever I would start with. And I started noticing, some people, I'm like, does that make sense? And they're like, yeah, I get it. And I'm like, no, really, does that make sense? I mean, do you see how that, communicates with there, and then an access list can block that off? And do you get it? And they're like, yeah, I think. I'm like, okay, explain it to me. They're like, well, this guy, they actually walk up and they kind of grab a whiteboard. They're like, okay, you got that computer, and it goes there. There's a firewall, right? So you block the port number, and so it can't get through, right? And I'm like, yeah, but man, I was like, I just like, but okay, so fast forward, right? That same person, I walked away from that just like totally like buzzkill mode. I'm like, man, maybe I'm just weird. I'm thinking, why were they not so excited that we were able to implement that? Well, the reason why, now I'm not saying that it's this way for everybody. But the reason why is because they got it, but they didn't get it. Meaning they saw me talk about it, and they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense, it's blocked. But until they had actually done it, because that same person, let me just fast forward, about 4 months later, I had them do it. I had them actually go in there and set up, and I can't even remember what it was, like an access list or something, and they totally did it wrong. They botched it, right? And they were like, oh, I don't get it. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, because let's do some show commands. They started walking through. I was like, oh, man, yeah, looks like you, again, this has been so long ago now, I don't even remember what it was, but I'll just say, oh, you applied that in the wrong direction or something like that. It looks like you did it wrong. And they're like, oh, okay. And I said, well, draw it out on paper. And I actually saw them draw it, and they're like, oh, okay, wait a sec. So they go in there, and then it's funny because I'm like, and they do it, and they set it up, and they're like, oh, and then they got it right. Whatever situation it was, they got it right. And that's when I saw them go, that was awesome. That was awesome. I tell that story. That's actually the first time I've ever told that story as I recorded a CBT Nugget series, because I was like, how much does that encapsulate what I'm trying to get for people? Building networks, IT. Like, can I just say IT in general? But there's nothing cooler than networking. I've been in a lot of different fields. Well, I'll say development is close if you have the stomach to palate doing development and semicolons in the wrong place and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, IT is one of the very few places where you can just build your own world, and it's so logical, and it's just kind of like, it's so clean. And can I just compare it? I know I did not totally mean to spend this much time on this, but it's so wonderful because I can compare it to working as a Windows administrator. Nothing against Windows administration. It's where I began. I started actually back in the Novell days. And those problems you get where you're like, why is it doing this? And you spend like 3 hours trying to figure out why. And you're like, well, let's just reboot. And you reboot and the problem goes away. That is the worst, like, most terrible thing you could ever do to somebody, because they're like, oh, well, looks like a reboot fixed it. Well, that was lame. Like, there's no logic. There's no puzzle you're putting together. You're like, yeah, we just reboot that server once every 3 days, and it fixes whatever that problem is. Yeah, I don't get it either. I don't want to spend all the time on, whatever. Cisco is so not that way. Do you get it, right? It all works fine. Do you run into bugs? Okay, yes, there are bugs in the Cisco world. I've run into it. It's frustrating, but oh my goodness, compared to working as a Windows admin, you can't compare it. So anyway, I'm getting way outside of my slide. How do we train? You just experienced it, right? It's all no script, no fluff. It's fun. Dual purpose is I want to impart knowledge to you guys. I want to explain experiences I've gone through. I want to explain the knowledge you need, of course, to pass the SPNGN2 exam if you want to go certification route. But overall, I just want you to realize just how amazingly cool this technology is and how much fun you can have doing your job. With that premise, how can you get the most from this series? Like as you're going through CBT Nuggets training, what's the best way to just maximize your learning? Well, I've used this slide for again, probably 8 years that I've been teaching with CBT Nuggets. So if you've had previously courses with me, you've seen this same slide. So can I just back away from the slide? I mean, the items are very logical, and give you one more kind of side motivational story that, again, I don't know why this series is different. I've never used these stories before, and I just feel like they're so good. Jeremy, you might say, are you always this wired about life in general, the world around you? Life is good. I would like to say yes. I would like to say I'm a positive person, but I can tell you I am not always like this. There are times. Can I just talk about the time where I got thrown into voice over IP? This was probably, well, good grief, time flies. Probably 10 years ago, I got moved into voice over IP when voice over IP was really bleeding edge, and I already had my CCIE in routing and switching, right? And I was like, oh, I totally don't want to do this, But I was a trainer. They needed somebody to teach call manager, so I was like, okay, well, I guess let's start learning this. And I started going through it, and when I came across, I don't know why it stands out to me. It just immediately came to mind when I thought about buzzkill, Nyquist theorem. Right? So I'm sitting there staring at this Nyquist theorem that I don't get. I'm scratching my head. I've read about it online. I've gone to Wikipedia, and the explanation doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, okay, so you've got waves of audio that become bits and whatever. And I remember walking out of a study session. I came up to them. They're like, how's it going? I'm like, terrible. I'm like, here I go from CCIE routing and switching to making phones ring. Lame, and like talk about, ambassador of negativity, right? That was totally me because I didn't get it back then. The longer I sat there and started saying to myself, you know what? I have to learn Nyquist theorem, and maybe this is an advantage I have that some of you don't, but because I'm going to teach it, right? I have to teach this concept. And I'm going to have people that if I don't get it, they're not going to get it. And so I've got to learn it. So I had to sit there. It took me like days to get this concept. I'm like, I don't get it. And then finally I'm like, oh, I get it. You get the audio wave and they sample it. I mean now I look at it, I'm like, oh, it's pretty simple, but it wasn't simple for me back then. So I'm like, and that's why a channel of audio takes 64 kilobits per second of bandwidth. Oh, that makes sense. And then you know what I said? Voice over IP is awesome. I love it. It's so cool because, why? Because I get it. I hate Macintosh. Why? Not because Macintosh and Apple isn't a cool operating system. It's just when it doesn't do what I want it to do, I'm like, stupid operating. Who uses this thing? Because I don't get it. I don't know how to troubleshoot an Apple computer. How can I say this? What you know is what you love. And the more you love what you know, the better you're going to do at it. And I'm telling you, if you want to be successful, really successful in IT, fall in love with it. With that, I will launch you into the SPNGN2 series, knowing that it's not all butterflies and flowers. It's not all going to be, I get this the first time around. There's going to be some work involved. You're going to hit some mental blocks where you're like, what do you mean 6-to-4 tunneling and how that, there's going to be times where you get frustrated, but I'm telling you, there's a pot of gold at the end of that frustration if you push through it, really get it, and do well at it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.